folded, watching intently. Jonathan understood the pressure to respond to the personal attacks, so he took a breath, letting his gaze sweep across the assembled crowd. "As for the speculation surrounding my personal life," he began, voice calm yet firm, "I'm aware of the rumors. I ask that you remember we live in a world where privacy is often invaded. I'll say this. My priority is and always will be ensuring that anyone connected to me is treated with dignity and respect." A murmur rippled through the audience. The subtler members nodded or scribbled notes. The more aggressive reporters narrowed their eyes, awaiting an opening to pounce. Jonathan concluded his remarks with a sharp pivot back to corporate matters, wrapping up with a note on transparency and accountability. Polite applause followed, but the tension hardly eased. The moment he stepped off stage, microphones materialized, jostling him. A cluster of reporters had bypassed security, hungry for a statement. He held up his hands to ward off the press of bodies. "Mr. Blake, is it true you have secret children?" one shouted over the others. "Are you trying to hide them to protect your career? Will this scandal force you to step down?" Their questions came in machine gun bursts. Jonathan swallowed a surge of irritation. On the periphery, he spotted Marcus waving for security, but a paparazzo slipped through the chaos, snapping photos with an invasive flash that nearly blinded him. "Enough," Jonathan said, keeping his voice cool. "I'm here to talk about the summit's purpose, corporate innovation, ethical leadership. My personal affairs are not the topic today. Isn't personal integrity key to ethical leadership?" The paparazzo thrust his phone forward, trying to record Jonathan's response. Jonathan caught sight of Richard in the background, quietly observing the spectacle with clear satisfaction. That sight churned Jonathan's stomach, but he squared his shoulders, refusing to lose composure. Before he could reply, a young security guard muscled the reporters aside, creating a path for him to exit. Jonathan broke away, ignoring the shouted questions that pursued him down the hallway. Cameras continued clicking frantically. He found a quiet corridor behind the main conference room. Marcus appeared by his side, shaking his head in dismay. "That was a scene. You okay?" "Fine," Jonathan said, though his pulse throbbed in his temples. "Richard is milking this, but I won't let him push me into a meltdown." Marcus sighed. "Yeah, well, the internet doesn't need a meltdown. Even a hint of anger from you will become tomorrow's headline." They made their way to a private lounge area set aside for speakers. A half-dozen chairs and a small table offered a brief refuge from the chaos outside. Jonathan collapsed into one of the chairs, running a hand over his face. He couldn't stop thinking about Imani's words, and the look on her face when she warned him not to break the girls' hearts. It fueled a quiet resolve not to let the scandal spin out of control. He was a grown man who could handle the fallout, but the twins were too young to be hounded by tabloids. Miles away at her workplace, Imani was no stranger to confrontation either. Rumors about her having a secret romance with a billionaire had filtered into her social circle. A few colleagues whispered thinly veiled criticisms, insinuating she might be using Jonathan for money or status. She felt eyes on her wherever she went, and it stung. Despite her resolve, she found her composure cracking whenever she thought about how it might affect the twins. She pushed through her day, answering emails and fielding calls with forced calm. By afternoon, she was on the verge of tears. At the summit, Jonathan stayed until the final panel discussion ended, making every effort to appear unwavering. In truth, he felt the day's tension gnawing at him. Every conversation with other executives seemed laced with subtle references to his predicament. He watched Richard deliver a closing statement full of smooth remarks about how personal conduct shapes corporate fortunes. Jonathan could practically taste the smugness in his tone. The moment it was over, Jonathan headed for the exit, Marcus trailing behind. Cameras flashed once more in the lobby. He ducked away, stepping outside into the late afternoon light. Cool air hit his face, and he exhaled with relief at having escaped the staged politeness of the conference rooms. He had just reached the sidewalk when his phone vibrated. He glanced at the caller ID. Imani. His pulse sped up, anxious that maybe more reporters had shown up at her door. He answered quickly. Her voice burst through, taut with panic. They found the school. Reporters showed up at the girls' school. Jonathan could still hear the echoes of applauding conference guests in his mind when Imani's urgent call snapped him into a new reality. Reporters had shown up at the twins' school. Every other concern vanished the instant he heard the strain in her voice. He and Marcus hopped into the waiting car, telling the driver to break every traffic rule necessary. Anxiety rippled through his veins, each minute feeling like an eternity. By the time they pulled up in front of the modest brick building, the school day was already over. Parents formed small huddles on the sidewalk, their expressions tense. Jonathan spotted a few individuals with cameras trying to be discreet. The presence of even one paparazzo was too much for him. Gritting his teeth, he got out of the car, Marcus close behind, and rushed toward the entrance. A security guard at the main doors held up a hand, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. "You can't just barge in, sir," he said, recognizing Jonathan's face from the onslaught of recent headlines. "Please step aside." Before Jonathan could protest, Imani appeared from inside, gently escorting Layla and Leah in front of her. The girls looked unsettled, their wide eyes darting around the small crowd. Jonathan's heart nearly broke seeing their confusion. He stepped closer, ignoring the cameras that clicked nearby like vultures waiting for carnage. Imani's tone was brisk but protective. "We're leaving," she told the guard quietly, maintaining an air of control for the girl's sake. Then her dark gaze landed on Jonathan. "They cornered me in the parking lot," she muttered, voice taut with anger, "asking questions about paternity, even trying to snap pictures of the twins. Some staff members helped us get inside." Jonathan swallowed hard. "Let's get them home safely. Please, let me give you a ride. I've got security with me." Imani studied him for a moment, reading the genuine worry in his eyes. Without another word, she nodded, gently guiding the twins along. Marcus stepped forward, shielding them from cameras and ushering everyone toward the car. Flashes burst, voices shouting. Leah looked up at Jonathan with a tremor in her voice. "Why are they taking pictures of us?" Layla clutched her sister's hand, searching for reassurance in every adult face around her. Jonathan leaned low, trying to keep his words steady. "They're just curious. But we're leaving, okay? Don't worry, you're safe." It was a hollow assurance, and he knew it. As soon as they got the girls buckled into the back seat with Imani, Jonathan slid in next to Marcus. The driver took off before any more reporters could press their lenses against the windows. Silence settled over them, broken only by the hum of the engine. Imani rubbed one of the girls' shoulders. "It's all right," she repeated, more for her own sake than theirs. She glanced sideways at Jonathan, anger and fear mingling in her features. "This is exactly what I wanted to avoid." Jonathan sat rigidly, hands clenched. He remembered the days after his parents' divorce. Reporters had hounded his father, a minor politician at the time, leaving Jonathan feeling exposed. The last thing he ever wanted was for Layla and Leah to experience that same sense of helplessness. "I'm sorry," he murmured, not really knowing if he was apologizing for the past or the present chaos. "I'm trying to shut this down." Imani let out a harsh breath. "How?" "It's out there now. Everyone's talking." No one spoke for the remainder of the drive. Tension hovered over every heart. When they arrived at Imani's home, a security guard Jonathan had hired stood watch. No paparazzi were in sight at that moment, but they all knew it wouldn't stay quiet for long. Inside, the girls moved robotically, as if they couldn't shake the unsettling event at school. Imani led them to the living room, urged them to sit and offered water. Jonathan trailed behind, his presence as uncertain as ever in that small home. A heavy silence blanketed them. Finally, Layla, the more outspoken of the two, raised her gaze. "Why were they calling you our dad?" she asked, voice trembling. "Aren't you just that man from the restaurant?" Jonathan exchanged a glance with Imani before he carefully crouched down, getting on their eye level. Leah, I know this might be confusing, he began softly. Your mom and we used to be married a long time ago, and I recently found out that I'm your father. Both girls stared at him, eyes searching, fear flickering behind their curiosity. Leah's lower lip quivered. Why didn't you come before? She whispered. Jonathan felt like every word was slicing through him. I didn't know about you, he replied, voice strained. If I had, I would have come sooner. I'm so sorry. Imani stood behind the couch, arms folded defensively across her chest. She didn't contradict him, didn't add anything, letting him struggle through this delicate confession. He reached for one of the girl's hands, though he stopped short, unsure if it would be welcome. You're not scared of us, right? Layla asked, blinking away tears. The question shocked Jonathan. Never, he said with quiet conviction. I'm only worried about people who want to take your pictures and invade your privacy. I'm worried about keeping you both safe, because... He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. Because I'm your dad, and that's what dads do. They protect their kids. Leah frowned, remembering the frightening scene at school. So, now what? Imani gently slipped into the conversation. For now, you two are going to stay home for a bit. We'll figure out how to keep the reporters away. She paused, glancing at Jonathan. We might even need to pull you from that school entirely, just until things calm down. Both girls' faces fell. They loved their school, their teachers, their friends. Jonathan could see the heartbreak in their eyes at the thought of leaving their familiar routines. A wave of guilt crashed over him, stronger than anything he'd felt before. His successes, his public identity, had become a source of pain for them. Eventually, Imani guided the girls upstairs to rest, urging them to play or read until dinner. Jonathan offered to step out so they could have space, but Imani stopped him with a gesture. She waited until the twins' footsteps faded. Can we talk? She said quietly, her voice tight. He nodded, and they moved to the small kitchen. Afternoon sunlight slanted through the window, illuminating the tension etched on her face. He leaned against the counter, trying to steady himself. I'm so sorry, he said for what felt like the 100th time. I never wanted them to be afraid. Imani raked a hand through her hair. I know, but it's happening, and we can't pretend otherwise. She closed her eyes for a moment. Look, I have to consider something. Maybe I should take the girls out of the city, at least until the scandal dies down. A cold wave of panic washed over Jonathan. Wait, leave the city entirely? That might be the only way, she insisted, voice trembling with frustration. I can't risk them being ambushed like this again. He swallowed, not wanting to imagine them disappearing. After all these lost years, he'd just found them. But how will I see them if you're gone? He tried to control the edge in his tone, but desperation bled through. She pressed her lips together, clearly torn. I don't know. Maybe you can visit once it's safe, or we can talk online. But I can't let them live in constant fear, Jonathan. His mind spun. It felt like his life was falling apart at every seam. The company under threat, the board doubting him, the media swirling with rumors. And now the prospect that the only family he had left might leave for good to escape the storm that followed his name. I get that, he said finally, voice rough. But please, at least let me try to fix this. Let me get it under control so you don't have to uproot them. Can you, though? She asked, desperation etched into the lines at the corners of her eyes. These reporters will do anything for a story. Your rival at work might be fueling half of this madness. Do you even have a plan? Jonathan rubbed the back of his neck. I'm working on it. I have attorneys trying to issue restraining orders for Paparazzi, and I'll confront my corporate rival. He's not untouchable. It's just complicated. Imani sighed, glancing toward the stairs where the twins had gone. Don't drag your feet. If this escalates, I'm out of here." She gave him a long, searching look. "I won't risk my daughter's safety for your fight." He couldn't argue. She had every right to protect them. "I promise I'll figure something out fast." He stayed for a few more minutes, discussing potential ways to handle the media. They couldn't settle on a perfect solution, but at least they talked. A couple of times they lowered their voices, worried the girls might overhear. Their hushed strategies did little to quiet the worry in Jonathan's mind. Eventually, he left the house, heart heavier than ever. Marcus waited in the car, looking concerned. As Jonathan slid into the passenger seat, he closed his eyes and took a few shaky breaths. "How bad is it?" Marcus asked softly, starting the engine. "Bad," Jonathan replied, voice hollow. "Imani's thinking about running again. I can't let that happen." Marcus offered a small nod of understanding. "We'll find a way. You're not alone in this." They drove off, neither speaking until they reached the skyscraper housing Jonathan's office. He braced himself for more calls from anxious board members and prying reporters, but the biggest ache in his chest was the idea that Imani and the twins might vanish if he couldn't contain the media frenzy. That night, Jonathan holed up in his penthouse, pacing near the windows that offered a view of the glittering city. The metropolis he had once revered felt suffocating, each tower a looming presence that seemed to mock his predicament. He pored over legal documents, read strategy proposals from PR consultants, and tried to quell the sense of impending doom. Hours later, near midnight, his phone buzzed. The ID on the screen was unknown. With a flicker of apprehension, he checked the message. It said, "I have evidence that can save you. Meet me tomorrow night." Jonathan found himself sitting alone in the back seat of a hired car, headlights sweeping across deserted streets as he neared the address sent by that unknown number. The city glowed in the distance, and each tower reminded him of how easily ambition could become a cage. He checked his phone again, rereading the cryptic text. "I have evidence that can save you. Meet me tomorrow night." It felt surreal, like stepping into a detective novel rather than his own life. He glanced toward Marcus in the driver's seat. They had decided not to bring a chauffeur or extra security this time, wanting to keep the meeting under the radar. If it was a setup, Jonathan preferred it be as discreet as possible. Still, a constant hum of nerves kept him on edge. He tugged at his collar, wishing for a breath of cooler air. They pulled up outside a dimly lit bar at the end of a narrow side street. Neon letters, half burnt out, spelled something that might once have read, "The High Note." Music thumped low inside. The sidewalk was mostly empty, a single street lamp flickering overhead. Marcus cut the engine, and they exchanged a tense look. "You're sure about this?" Marcus asked, voice hushed. "No," Jonathan admitted, stepping out anyway. "But if there's a chance it could clear my name and end Richard's sabotage, I have to check it out." The inside of the bar smelled of stale beer and chipped varnish. A handful of patrons sat hunched over drinks, casting the occasional glance at the newcomers. Colored lights blinked from a small stage where an ancient jukebox droned a sad tune. Jonathan spotted a lone figure in a dark hoodie at a corner table, face half hidden by the dimness. He and Marcus approached cautiously. Without speaking, the figure tilted their head, gesturing for Jonathan to sit. Marcus stood nearby, arms folded, clearly ready to intervene if something went wrong. Jonathan eased into the chair opposite the stranger, scanning for any sign of weapons or a trap. The hooded person produced a battered folder, sliding it across the sticky tabletop. "In there," came a low voice, "is what you need to prove Richard's behind your company leaks. And more." Jonathan glanced at the file, adrenaline flooding him. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. "My identity doesn't matter," the stranger said, voice muffled. "What matters is that Richard Myers has used offshore accounts and shell companies to hide illegal activities. He's orchestrated your scandal to drive down your stock value and push you out. Once you're gone, he'll swoop in and take control." Jonathan's heart pounded. "So these documents show that?" They show enough to start an investigation." The hooded figure placed a gloved hand on the folder, as though reluctant to let go. Signatures tying Richard directly to those secret accounts, large sums suddenly vanishing and reappearing in off-the-books deals. The paper trail's there. You just need to confirm it's real. Marcus stepped closer, eyes locked on the folder. "Why are you helping us?" The stranger hesitated. "Let's say I got burned by Richard's methods. This is my way of making sure he doesn't get away with it again." Then, in a single fluid motion, they rose. "Check the docs, decide for yourself, but be careful. Richard doesn't play fair." Before Jonathan could press for more, the figure brushed past them, disappearing into a side exit. Marcus made to follow, but Jonathan put a hand on his arm. "Let them go," he murmured, flipping open the folder. He caught a glimpse of spreadsheets, account numbers, grainy copies of passports. His pulse thumped faster. Without waiting, they headed to the car. The stale bar light faded behind them. Back on the deserted street, Marcus started the engine, and Jonathan's hands trembled slightly as he examined the papers in the passing glow of each street lamp. By the time they reached Jonathan's penthouse, a quiet excitement had taken root in his chest. Marcus parked, and they took the elevator upstairs in tense silence. In the living room, they laid out the documents on a coffee table. "It looks legit," Marcus remarked, eyes scanning page after page. "Dates align with when the leaks started. Transactions lead back to shell companies we suspected might be tied to Richard." Jonathan sank onto the sofa, adrenaline still kicking. "If we can authenticate these records, we can expose him. We can prove he's behind the sabotage." They worked late into the night, cross-referencing details. When the sun crept over the skyline, Jonathan finally set aside the last sheet. He felt something he hadn't in a long while. Hope, bright and pulsing. If Richard's corruption was exposed, maybe the tabloids and stock panic would die down. Maybe the pressure on Imani and the twins would ease. The next day, Jonathan received a cautious yet somewhat encouraging text from Imani. She said the girls were calmer now that they weren't attending school, though they missed their friends desperately. Their teacher had agreed to send them assignments at home, and a neighbor checked in regularly to help them stay occupied. Imani ended with, "If you really can end this, do it fast." Buoyed by the potential lifeline in those documents, Jonathan arranged a visit with Imani that afternoon. She met him in the living room, the twins upstairs, presumably playing with something to distract themselves from the madness outside. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. Even so, she greeted him with less frost in her tone than usual. "I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt," she admitted, "but each day I see more headlines and my resolve to leave gets stronger." Jonathan gently set a hand on her arm, searching her eyes. "Imani, I have evidence now. Enough to take down the man fueling these rumors. If I can make a public statement, show the board the truth about Richard, this scandal might finally turn around." She studied his face, and for once, he saw a flicker of tentative optimism in her expression. "And the girls?" she asked. He gave a slow nod. "They deserve a normal life. No cameras chasing them, no reporters hounding you for quotes. That's what I'm fighting for." Just then, the girls peeked around the corner. Layla clutched a stuffed animal while Leah hovered behind her. Jonathan smiled gently, beckoning them forward. "Hey," he said, kneeling to their level. "How are you two holding up?" Layla fiddled with the stuffed animal's ear. "We're bored," she said. "We can't go to school or the park. Mom says it's too risky." Jonathan winced at the reality they were living. "What if we do something fun together just for a little while?" he suggested, glancing at Imani for permission. "Could go to the park if we're careful, or maybe somewhere else less crowded. I'll have security keep the paparazzi away." The girls exchanged hopeful looks. Imani pursed her lips, hesitant, but finally relented. "Just be extra cautious. One camera and we're out of there." A few hours later, they arrived at a quiet park on the outskirts of the city, courtesy of Jonathan's driver, who looped around to ensure no reporters had tailed them. The playground was nearly empty, save for a couple of toddlers and a watchful parent. Jonathan's security team lingered discreetly at a distance, eyes peeled for any suspicious onlookers. Layla and Leah skipped across the grass, apparently relieved to be outdoors. Jonathan walked alongside Imani, feeling a strange warmth bloom in his chest each time he heard the girls laugh. For a moment, as the wind stirred the leaves overhead, he felt normal, like a father simply watching his kids play. He found himself pushing Layla on a swing gently so she could feel the breeze without losing control. Leah tugged on Imani's sleeve, wanting help to climb a low tree branch. In the lull of that moment, Jonathan caught Imani's eye and saw something soft there, a glimpse of the old closeness they once shared. After the girls, tired of running around, they settled on a bench near the playground's edge, sipping from water bottles Jonathan had brought along. Imani and Jonathan found a spot under a tall oak. He felt a rush of memories, days when they dreamed about having children, about traveling the world, building a life hand in hand. Fate had taken them down different roads, but he hoped they could still forge some kind of family bond. "I never stopped thinking about you," he said quietly, surprising even himself with the admission. "But I got so wrapped up in building my empire that I let you slip away. And if these past weeks have shown me anything, it's that I need to be there for our daughters, no matter what." She lowered her gaze. "We both made mistakes. We both let things get between us. My fear, your ambition." She exhaled. "But I see you trying now, and I can't say I hate it." Before he could answer, a flicker of movement caught his eye at the edge of the park. One of his security guys tensed, speaking urgently into a small earpiece. Jonathan's heart sank. Paparazzi? He could see a car idling, a camera lens poking out the window. "Time to go," he muttered to Imani, jaw tight. She nodded, annoyance flashing across her face. The fragile peace shattered in an instant. They hurried back to the waiting car with the twins, shielding them from any possible angles. The driver took off, guided by radio updates from security to avoid the trailing vehicle. The girls huddled together in the back seat, a new wave of worry creasing their small brows. Jonathan exchanged a glance with Imani. They both realized this was no way to live, forever looking over their shoulders. Back at Imani's home, Jonathan sat with Marcus late into the evening, scanning the documents once more. Ms. Yang, one of the few sympathetic voices on the board, had agreed to look at the evidence privately. If she and a few other key players believed him, they could confront Richard. That confrontation would be Jonathan's best shot at stopping the scandal and keeping Imani and the twins from running again. Shortly after midnight, Jonathan's phone chimed. He expected a message from Ms. Yang, but instead, the text read, "If you think you can ruin me, think again." Jonathan lowered his phone, pulse skittering from the text that read, "If you think you can ruin me, think again." He stood by the tall windows of his penthouse, looking out over the sleeping city, lights shimmering like distant stars. The night felt eerily quiet, as if the city itself held its breath. Marcus watched him from across the room, sensing the weight of that threat. "We have to assume it's from Richard," Marcus said, his voice subdued. "He knows we have something on him." Jonathan nodded. "He's not one to scare easily. This means he's feeling cornered and dangerous." He crossed the plush living room, stepping around scattered papers and printouts that documented Richard's secret offshore accounts. In a neat stack lay the folder from that hooded informant, everything carefully catalogued. Enough evidence to topple Richard if revealed at the right time. Marcus rubbed his temples. "With tomorrow's board meeting, we need a plan. You can't just walk in and slam these documents on the table. We need to confirm their authenticity, or Richard will tear them apart." Jonathan bristled. "Ms. Yang is making calls to a forensic accountant. We'll have partial verification by morning." He paused, glancing at the city lights. "I have no choice. If I sit on this information, Richard's sabotage continues. The stock dips, the press devours me, and Imani will feel forced to leave town with the twins." Marcus stood a moment, weighing the risk. "Then we go all in," he said, voice resolute. "Expose Richard, or risk losing everything." Early the next morning, the tension in Jonathan's chest refused to subside. Each email he opened carried more bad news. Rumors of internal strife leaked to the press, investors threatening to withdraw. He fought to keep calm, dreading what else might surface before the day was done. Midway through sorting through the deluge of messages, Ms. Yang called. Her tone was clipped. "Our forensic team says the documents are real enough to raise serious questions about Richard's activities. I'm going to rally the board members who still have some faith in you." Jonathan thanked her, a wave of guarded relief washing over him. Yet a part of him couldn't help but wonder how far Richard would go to maintain control. He recalled the text. "If you think you can ruin me, think again." By lunchtime, Jonathan found himself pacing in his office while Marcus updated him on swirling rumors. A new article had popped up claiming unethical leadership under Jonathan's watch, citing anonymous sources. Another boasted that a major client was reconsidering its partnership. Nothing Jonathan could confirm, but it all stoked the flames of doubt around him. He mulled over calling Imani to reassure her, but the phone rang before he could. The receptionist announced that Richard was in the lobby, demanding to speak. Jonathan stiffened, nodding for security to let him up. When Richard finally strode in, the tension was palpable. He wore a crisp suit and that polished smile Jonathan had grown to hate. Leaning casually against the doorframe, he shrugged off the guard's presence, as though he owned the place. "Always a pleasure, Blake," Richard drawled, stepping into the office. His gaze flicked around at the scattered paperwork. "Been busy, I see." Jonathan forced himself to remain calm. "What do you want?" Richard heaved an exaggerated sigh. "Just a friendly warning. You're playing a dangerous game. If you make wild accusations at the board meeting, you'll only humiliate yourself. My lawyers will bury you in defamation suits." Jonathan squared his shoulders. "Is that all?" "For now," Richard replied with a thin smile. "But I advise you to consider your position. Step down gracefully, spare yourself further embarrassment. Leave with a shred of dignity, before your personal fiasco drags the company deeper under." Rage flashed in Jonathan's eyes, but he held it back. "I'm not stepping down." Richard shrugged, a smug tilt of his head. "Your funeral." With that, he offered a curt nod and headed out, footsteps echoing down the corridor. Marcus emerged from the corner, tension in his face. "He's afraid you'll use the documents. He's trying to bait you." Jonathan nodded, lips pressed tight. "He's not just trying. He's threatening me in plain sight. We press on. Show the board what we have." He paused, glancing at the time. Less than 24 hours remained until the meeting. "I only hope it's enough." Afternoon drifted into evening and Jonathan's phone buzzed with a text from Imani. "Girls are anxious. Layla's having nightmares about strangers at the door. Do something." The simple plea hit Jonathan like a punch to the gut. He stared at the words, remembering the bright hope in the twins' eyes, the fragile trust blossoming between them. Each day the media storm raged, that trust stood on shakier ground. He slipped out of the office and drove straight to Imani's home, ignoring the pile of tasks left undone. When he arrived, he found Imani in the living room, hugging Layla tight while Leah hovered nearby with worry etched on her small face. The windows were drawn, security stationed outside. The place felt more like a bunker than a home. Imani glanced up, relief flickering through her expression. "They can't sleep," she whispered. "Leah's calmer, but Layla can't stop thinking about the cameras and strangers." Jonathan knelt next to the couch, meeting Layla's eyes. "Hey, kiddo," he said softly. "I'm sorry you're scared, but I promise we're all here to keep you safe." Leah eyed him carefully. "Mom says you're trying to fix it," she said. "But when?" Jonathan exchanged a heavy look with Imani, then turned to the girls. "Tomorrow, I have a big meeting. After that, things should start to get better. I know it's hard to believe, but I'm doing everything I can." Layla sniffled. "I just want to see my friends again." The simple statement felt like a dagger. All the spreadsheets, negotiations, and legal moves seemed so hollow compared to a child's desire for normalcy. Jonathan tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "Soon, I hope," he whispered. Imani stood, beckoning him into the hallway while the girls retreated to their room. She kept her voice low. "If your plan doesn't work, I have to take them away for a while. I hate it, but I can't watch them live like this." Jonathan nodded, an ache in his throat. "I know, but trust me. Tomorrow, Richard's done. After that, we'll handle the press." Her eyes lingered on him a moment. There was exhaustion, but also a glimmer of faith. "I'll give you time, but please, don't fail us." He left the house, heart heavy. The next hours blurred. He barely slept, too busy confirming final details with Ms. Yang and ensuring the documents were ready for the board. Each time he dozed, visions of Layla's tear-streaked face surfaced, urging him to stand firm. When morning came, an undercurrent of grim determination guided him. Marcus led the way to the executive boardroom, documents tucked in a discreet briefcase. Jonathan wore a steely expression, bracing for battle. The building thrummed with tension. Employees sensed something big was about to unfold. Inside, the board members settled around the long table. Richard sat near one end, a small smirk resting on his face. Ms. Yang caught Jonathan's eye, giving a near imperceptible nod. He inhaled deeply, preparing to present the evidence. This was his last chance to redeem himself in the eyes of the company and to protect his family. Yet just as he was about to speak, a commotion erupted in the corridor. Two employees bustled in, cell phones in hand, frantic worry on their faces. One of them sputtered, "Breaking news!" Her voice trembled as she forced the words out. "It's about Jonathan Blake!" A collective hush fell. Jonathan's stomach twisted. He locked eyes with Marcus, who quickly pulled out his own phone. A fresh wave of dread washed over him as he anticipated more scandal. As the employees tried to explain, phones lit up around the room with a single jarring headline. A startling news alert flashed across Jonathan's phone. "Anonymous tip claims Jonathan Blake's paternity test is fake." The headline blazed across every phone screen in the boardroom. "Anonymous tip claims Jonathan Blake's paternity test is fake." A knot tightened in Jonathan's stomach. Whispers erupted around the table and board members exchanged wary glances. Richard, seated off to the side, tilted his head with a satisfied little smirk. Jonathan glanced at Marcus, who wore an expression of quiet alarm. Ms. Yang set down her phone and looked at Jonathan with urgent concern. Outside, employees huddled in small groups, the news fueling their hushed discussions. Jonathan could practically feel the weight of every eye in the building. He steadied himself, refusing to let fear show. "This so-called tip is just another desperate tactic," he said, raising his voice so that everyone in the room could hear. "I never even took a paternity test. There's nothing to fake. This entire claim is a fabrication." An uneasy murmur drifted around the long table. Some board members appeared skeptical. After all, rumors had plagued Jonathan for weeks. Others seemed open to hearing him out. Richard feigned a pitying sigh, neatly folding his hands. "You've been under a lot of stress," he said. "Rumors fly more easily when there's confusion at the top." Jonathan pressed his palms on the polished wood of the board table. "The only confusion comes from sabotage," he replied calmly. "I have evidence that one of our major shareholders, Richard Myers, has systematically destabilized our company for personal gain." All eyes snapped to Richard, who managed to keep his mouth curved in a thin smile. "Are you insinuating I leaked internal information and orchestrated a scandal around your secret family?" he asked, voice dripping with feigned offense. "That's exactly what I'm saying," Jonathan stated, and he reached into a leather portfolio. Ms. Yang's expression hardened with determination. while a few other board members leaned in, curiosity lighting their faces. Jonathan lifted the documents for everyone to see. These are authenticated files showing shell companies tied to Richard's personal accounts. Money has been funneled in ways that coincide with our stock dips and the tabloids' timing. Richard's face remained impassive, but Jonathan saw a flicker of tension in the man's jaw. "Ridiculous," Richard said. "These documents are likely forgeries. Anyone with a grudge could manufacture them. Or perhaps you did, Mr. Blake, in an effort to distract from your personal failures." A few board members shifted uneasily, clearly unsure whom to believe. Jonathan glanced at Ms. Yang, who rose from her seat and pointed to the pages. "I had an independent forensic accountant verify these," she said. "They show consistent patterns of insider trading, and the IP addresses linked to leaked documents trace back to one of Richard's shell companies." That pronouncement electrified the room. Several board members began talking all at once, their voices a cacophony of anger, confusion, and dismay. The CFO, who had spent the last week struggling to quell the company's upheaval, flipped through the data with growing shock. Richard tried to counter with a flurry of denials, but the tide was turning. "Let's restore order," one of the senior board members finally shouted, banging a gavel on the table's surface. "We'll not solve this in chaos." Gradually, the noise subsided. Jonathan straightened, refusing to let the swirl of tension knock him off balance. "For weeks I've been under attack, both professionally and personally. My family has been harassed, my credibility questioned. I'm done playing defense." He paused, glancing at the CFO and the others around the table. "I may be a CEO, but first and foremost, I'm a father who can't allow malicious rumors to ruin two innocent girls' lives." A hush fell as he continued. "I accept that I haven't always been transparent about my private affairs, but the truth is simple. Imani, my ex-wife, and I share two children, Layla and Leah. They're my daughters. I never took a paternity test because I didn't need one, and if there's confusion, it's because I chose to keep them away from the cruelty of public scrutiny while I sorted out the company's issues." Marcus quietly stepped forward and placed another folder on the table. A carefully compiled set of personal records, photos, and letters that confirmed Jonathan's role as a father, dating back to the earliest glimpses of the girl's existence in Imani's life. He'd gathered them with Imani's permission, hoping to dispel the swirl of lies. Jonathan spread the pages with a steady hand. "These confirm my daughter's birth dates and my name on certain official forms, left unpublicized. I wasn't aware of their existence at first, which is on me, but it doesn't make them any less mine. And now, for their sake, I'm laying my private life bare." Richard tried again to object, shifting in his seat. "This is all very touching," he said. "But we came here to discuss the future of the company, not... The future of this company is entangled with your illegal activities." Jonathan cut him off, voice firm. "We can't thrive under a board member who manipulates the market and tries to force out leadership through scandal and intimidation." The CFO spoke up at last, looking directly at Richard. "If these documents are legitimate, we can't continue working with you. It would tank investor confidence, and we'd face massive legal repercussions." One by one, heads nodded around the table, acknowledging the gravity of the evidence. Ms. Yang stepped in, highlighting the authenticity checks that had been done, the timeline of suspicious stock movements, and the correlations with Richard's maneuvers. Richard's confident facade cracked. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping across the floor. "You're making a grave mistake," he spat. "I've contributed significantly to the company's growth." "You nearly destroyed it," Jonathan replied, voice calm despite the adrenaline surging through him. "Your contributions don't excuse corporate espionage." A tidal wave of emotion burst in the room. The board members conferred in hushed tones, the CFO shaking his head in anger and betrayal. At last, one of the senior members made a succinct motion. Richard's immediate removal from the board, pending an internal investigation and possible criminal charges. Richard's mouth twisted in fury, He slammed a fist on the table, glaring at Jonathan. "You'll regret this." Jonathan met his glare head-on. "No, Richard. You will." Security stepped in to ensure Richard left the premises. As he was escorted out, the board members pivoted toward Jonathan, some contrite for doubting him, others still rattled by the scandal. The CFO asked, "Are you willing to remain in your leadership role?" "Yes," Jonathan answered, relief weaving through his tension. "But first, we repair the damage. We make a public statement clarifying the truth, that Richard acted alone, that the company stands united, and I want it known that my family, my daughters, are off limits. We will protect them." The board, seeing the determination in his eyes, gradually agreed. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. They'd have to rebuild trust with investors, handle the legal fallout of Richard's downfall, and navigate the media's unrelenting curiosity. But at least the cancer within the company had been exposed. After the board meeting concluded, Jonathan stepped into the hallway, heart thudding. Marcus followed close behind, a rare grin on his face. "We did it," he murmured, clapping Jonathan on the shoulder. "Finally." Jonathan let out a breath he felt he'd been holding for weeks. "It's not over," he said, "but it's a start." Outside, word had already spread. Reporters crowded the lobby, hungry for a statement. Security guards kept them from surging forward as Jonathan emerged. Cameras flashed, and microphones angled in his direction. He raised a hand, and the commotion quieted just enough for him to speak. "I understand the public has questions," he said, voice carrying through the clang of cameras. "I can confirm I have 2 daughters, Layla and Leah, whom I love deeply. Recent rumors of a fake paternity test are just that, rumors. And as of now, Richard Myers is no longer a part of this company. We've uncovered serious misconduct. The details will emerge in due time." Reporters erupted in shouted queries. Jonathan gave a few measured answers, then excused himself, refusing to feed the frenzy further. Spotting his driver's car waiting curbside, he slipped into the back seat. Marcus got in on the passenger side, phone already buzzing. The first call Jonathan made was to Imani. She answered on the 3rd ring, voice tight with anticipation. "How did it go?" "Richard's out," Jonathan said, letting himself finally smile. "The board believed the evidence. We'll face some fallout, but it's manageable." Imani's sigh was like a release of weeks of tension. "That's good news, really good news. I'll handle the media," Jonathan promised gently, "so the girls can have their normal lives back. If we do this right, the press will lose interest soon enough." There was a pause. Then softly, "Thank you. I know you did this for more than just the company. You did it for them." Jonathan closed his eyes, relief crashing through him. "I did it for all of us. I meant what I said. I'm here for them, no matter what." Late that afternoon, he visited Imani's house. This time, no paparazzi waited outside. The scandal's tide seemed to have turned. Layla and Leah squealed in delight when they saw Jonathan bounding over to show him their latest drawings. Imani stood by the window, arms folded casually, a tentative smile catching the corners of her mouth. Jonathan felt an ache of gratitude. Everything he valued was in this room. Soon after, they decided to take a short walk around the block, just the 4 of them, to test if the media had truly backed off. The sun cast a warm glow on the sidewalks, and a gentle breeze ruffled the girls' hair. It felt almost ordinary, if not for the quiet security detail maintaining distance behind them. At one point, Leah asked if she could hold Jonathan's hand. A lump formed in his throat as he nodded. Layla grinned and grabbed Imani's. They strolled together, a small unit, overshadowed no longer by fear but by the bright possibility of what might come next. By the time evening descended, Jonathan had to return to the office to finalize statements. Imani sent him off with a grateful look, the twins clinging in a brief hug before letting him go. Once he wrapped up urgent calls and emails, he found himself in front of the building's exit doors, the city lights shining through the glass. Outside, a single reporter recognized him. "What now, Mr. Blake?" the reporter called. Jonathan paused, spotting Layla and Leah waiting for him just beyond the doors, with Imani nearby. He realized he had the answer right there in front of him. He walked over, taking each twin by the hand, and offered the reporter a confident smile. "I have a family to protect," he said simply, "and that's all that matters." If you enjoyed this story, don't miss the next one. Just click on the screen.